All right, welcome back to the Coach Robb Podcast Network, Navigating Amateur Motocross, episode number 8. Derek, can you believe we're nearly at double digits? How do we get here?
It's the Grant Langston episode today. Can you
There you
think of
go.
another number 8 since Grant Langston?
I was thinking, wasn't Greg Albertine number 8 as well?
Prior to Grant Langston?
Yeah, that was the only two that I could think of. And then I was trying to go back. Doug Henry, that was 18, wasn't it?
Maybe. I can't think of one since Grant Langston. I'm sure there has been one, but off the
Yeah,
top of my head, can't think of one. So what's wrong with the number 8?
no, not at all. Grant Langston's a class act, both on and off the track. So that's a good tribute to it.
Yeah.
Man, we got through another round of Loretta's. I have to ask you, how many years have you been there?
Well, you brought up a number that you'd been there. So the first year that I went in person was '09. So
Okay.
15 years now. And I didn't go every single year, but I went a few and then off. And then I probably have been like since 20, I believe 16. I think I've been every single year since.
Gotcha. Yeah, as we mentioned before we got started, I've been there 18 years and it's crazy. The more things change, the more they stay the same. That's kind of been my observation of Loretta's, hence the title. If you and I always tease, it's kind of hard to it's hard to argue with results, right? As we always say, results don't lie. But with that being said, I'm really excited about this show today. I mean, you were kind enough to join me. We were up there in the tower together and got a chance to meet a lot of the riders. And I was surprised, not for those of you who follow us on other social media platforms, we did kind of a meet and greet. Appreciate everybody who came out and got a chance to chat, ask questions, and things like that. But what I found interesting, Derek, is watching the racing. You and I got a chance to watch a lot of races together, and we had a lot of observations. No pun intended. It's like I'm seeing and hearing a lot of the frustrations that I heard the very first year I was there. The only thing that was missing this year, and I'd like to get your feedback on things that you saw that were repetitive and overlapped year after year. We didn't have to deal with the mud this year, thank goodness. But the air was wet enough. It felt like it could rain at any moment. If you could squeeze a cloud, I think we would have had a track full of water. But
And the
how
amount they
about,
water between motos for some people in certain
mhm,
sections is like riding in the mud. Not quite,
absolutely.
but you'll have
Mhm.
laps that are slippery and greasy, which is one of the positives of Loretta's.
Well, I do remember you saying when you went to a couple of the pro outdoor nationals, you were talking about the incredible skills that those guys have that, yeah, they put water down and they're still coming in double barrels, just flying through, but they've got that proprioceptive balance that allows them to be able to kind of skate through that ice without actually putting themselves on the ground. It did bite Masterpool twice, over the weekend, but
Yep.
yeah, it's amazing how those guys make it look so easy. You and I were talking a lot
They're that
about,
good, right? They're
well,
just
when you see
that good.
Shorty out there, you and I were observing Shorty coming past that mechanics area, never letting off the gas, grabbing a shift between that little molehill right at the end of the, I call it mechanics row, that little roller. He'd go around that, he'd grab an upshift and never let off the gas and go right in between the next big roller, and he wouldn't get caught in that real deep rut. He'd just go right across it. I was like, my gosh, that was it. To me, it was almost scary fast how fast he went through there. And he looks like he's just on a Sunday ride.
And he
But
still
man,
got it, right? Peak
he's
speed,
got
him
it.
and Mike Brown, peak
Mm-hmm.
lap time speed, not far off peak times for the week.
Yep.
Maybe top five ish, I think is what they kind of shook down as. And just proves that at that level for those national championship level guys, their brain and body just see things a little bit differently than maybe the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, it's a controversial subject. You know how I feel with it. I love the idea that the X Pros are coming back. I just wish they had their own designated X Pro, like
Yeah.
somebody had mentioned to me, and I thought this was legit. If you're an X Pro, you should only be allowed to race in the pro and or the pro sport classes because, like you said, you're acclimated to that. Now I understand that there's an age issue there, but when you're seeing Brownie and those guys 35, 40 seconds a lap faster than some guys, it just, I don't know.
So my counter narrative to that, and I think we talked about this, was I
Yeah.
wanted to go when I was 25 purely
Hmm.
because I'd heard Carmichael was going, and I heard there was a couple like Rayner. There's always former guys who are in that class.
Sure.
When else am I going to get to line up with Ricky Carmichael? Like I didn't
Hmm.
earn that right as a young person. So I thought that was the opportunity not to beat him, of course, but to say, hey, dude, I got on the same gate as that guy. So to me, even though I knew I'd probably get smoked by, lapped probably, but I think that's the validation of if you're a vet rider and you're not one of those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, oh, what are you going to say? You're the best of the rest. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I couldn't beat Brown and I couldn't beat Shorty. And then what's the next person? Because you have John Gruey and these other guys who were in those classes who were also former national guys. They also got
Right.
smoked by 30 seconds. So to me,
Hmm.
that's the one race of the year that those guys should be allowed to go to per se. And not say one, but like that means that if you made that in the vet classes, you actually accomplished something. You know what I
I
mean?
never thought about it that way. Let me throw another counter narrative to your counter narrative of my narrative. And that is you were really, really good. And for whatever reason you've already explained it, you didn't go pro, et cetera, et cetera. But what about that guy whose parents couldn't afford it? You got a taste of it. Parents couldn't afford it. Build your business. You raise enough capital that now you can go back there. And I mean, you and I tease a little bit about it in the lookout tower. You and I will never be able to bridge the amount of hours that Emig and those guys have shaking down bikes, test riding bikes year over year over year over year. So to me, it's like, but I never thought about it from that perspective. And you have opened my eyes to something new. Hey, it is a chance to race it. And then there's those people that maybe it's less of they're not as enamored by the idea of racing against those guys, but they're going to essentially never be able to win a championship there or even be in the top three because you're racing against ex
Yeah.
pros.
So you
So
knock
it's
off your
tough.
prime competition, but there's still somebody that you're, unless you got third this year in those two classes,
Yeah,
like you're not advocating for those guys to be gone, right?
that's
Because you
true.
were the next guy to get the title. So at what point does it end? To me, there's 42 or whatever that make it.
Yep.
You can say you were the top 42 vet dudes who still decided to line up in battle. And to me, that's worth something against all
Absolutely.
comers. Against
Absolutely.
all comers. Like for me, the year that I wanted to go, the 25 years, the best I've ever ridden in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And at like our regional, unfortunately, I got hurt that year, literally first lap in, riding awesome. I was passing dudes who were making night shows in Supercross that year.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's like, but I had earned that because I've been working really hard and I've been
Mm-hmm.
riding really good. And I had gotten better as a rider. I was actually better at 25 than I was at 18.
Yep.
Not in every like I was faster and better and bikes are better and all that. I didn't have my mentality and my aggression, all the things I had at 18. But the
Sure.
point was I had earned that. And people like at local races would be like, well, why are you racing plus 25 class and pro class? I'm like, like 4 years ago, I was racing B class.
Mm-hmm.
So don't sit here and tell me that I haven't earned the right to race A and 25. I've had to work my way up to that pace, right? So I'm
Exactly.
still grinding at it just because you're 25 and not grinding at it. And I was running my business, not like it was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, daddy's still paying for it.
Exactly.
So
Yep.
to me, I think it's a validation of like what race, if we're not going to have a race that means something to, then what do we have? That particular race is for vets who are of all shapes and sizes and comers. And if you really truly make it to Loretta's, you earned it, right? Like you flat out earned it. Now, the plus 30 class and one of the plus 40s, I don't recall which one, 45,
Mm-hmm.
50, whatever it is. Those are non points earning pro classes. So you could
Yep.
never have earned a point in your entire pro career. So those are sportsman classes. Those are sort of
Absolutely.
kind of what you're
Those
talking
are
about,
cool. No,
right?
I agree with you 100%.
Like, I mean,
And
think Shorty's what, 42?
two. Yeah, I think
And he raced the
42.
pro class. He could have raced plus 25.
Yeah.
So to
I
your
would,
point, he went to chase after Brown because
yes.
Brown's been crushing it, but he decided not to go and he would have dominated. No, he would not have dominated 25, excuse me, but he would have had a good shot in that class. But he chose to race the pro class because that's where he
Mm-hmm.
feels he slots in. And I have to respect that.
Yeah. And let's give respect where respect is due. You and I were sitting there watching that race, and Brownie just wadded up. The fact that he got up, got back
Yeah.
on the bike, it reminds me of J Coop this weekend,
Oh,
catching the rear wheel of Hunter. And like you said, being able to tuck, roll, tumble, get up. You and I already had our conversation of whether or not he was concussed or not, that him being J Coop. But I just remember took literally the breath out of everybody who watched Brownie hit that little, just side
yeah.
swapped it, because that was a very, very fast section. I don't think like everything, right? We just had the Olympics and you're watching the marathon and they're going through the mile mark at 420, 450, whatever it is,
Right.
male or what. You're like, dude, TV just does not do it justice.
No, and that is
Um,
the fastest ish area of Loretta's where he
that
he went
was
down. So
unbelievable.
he's a beast. I mean, to impressive, right? And guess
Yeah.
what? Brownie's always a beast. And
Hmm.
there's a reason why he's a good guy, but there's a mentality that we're going to talk on the show. So
Yep.
I think we were going to title this. So Loretta's didn't go so hot.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Um,
but realistically, we don't want to be negative. We want to
no,
say,
no.
okay, so it didn't go so hot. Let's acknowledge that. The
Hmm.
question is, what are you going to do to make it be what you need it to be? And that's what this podcast is hopefully here to help you guys do. And it also, if we can't help you, it's to make you ask the right questions. And hopefully we can pose some of those questions today.
And I
So you
think,
said Loretta's has changed, but it hasn't. So you've been there for
yeah.
18 years. Why don't you just
Mhm.
rattle off something that used to be said and was said that you heard this year? What are some things that you feel that haven't changed?
I'll tell you what, Derek, I could like just go down a rapid fire. The thing that's crazy to me is the heat and humidity. I was surprised how many people were like, wow, it's really hot and humid here. And that always dumbfounds me because it's always hot. It's always humid. And as we said earlier, the only thing that we didn't get blessed with this year was a bunch of rain. So add, another variable of uncertainty associated with the race. But I was astounded. Every parent and every rider that I spoke to who, I'm going to use the word, complained about the heat and humidity, I simply asked them, so what was your hydration strategy? And not one person had a hydration strategy. And yes, I will start today's conversation by saying, yes, I respect it's my wheelhouse, but the whole purpose of this show is, what do I know about it that maybe one of the listeners, whether it's a rider and or a parent or collectively both, maybe they could take away a nugget that'll fix it. And we'll talk a little bit about it. How about yourself? What was the most glaring one that smacked you in the face?
On my side, we've talked about this ad nauseum on the show already, which is a little bit of a lack of preparedness on motorcycles. So
In regards to bike setup?
it could be all of the above,
Okay.
right? So, for
Okay.
example, number one, if you show up to Loretta's and your bike just flat out doesn't run, which we're going to give you an example. He's not a client of mine, but I heard a little bit about it. And if we could have helped him, I would have liked to. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a kid named Patrick Murphy who is a very, very fast rider.
Mm-hmm.
Just raced Budds Creek as a real pro. And I think he was top 20. I think he was top 15. He qualified, like you'd mentioned, very, very well. Here's a guy who probably was hoping to come into Loretta's and maybe show some of these factories that he's pretty darn good. From what I heard, and I don't know what the deal was, I heard his bikes just didn't run all week. Go look up his results. It was like DNF, DNF, DNS, DNS, whatever it was. And
Mm-hmm.
from what I had heard from an individual trying to help him out and kind of had called us maybe if we could help was, hey, it just something's wrong with the ECU or something's wrong with the motor, but the bike is just bogging. It's unsafe for him to ride. So it's not a lack of him wanting to ride.
Right.
But how do you show up to Loretta's? This is like, if this is an important race for you, you put it on the calendar and you spend all that money and you do the qualification process. Clearly, your bike ran at the regional. What the heck did you do wrong between regional and Loretta's to where your bike flat out won't run and can't be easily fixed by the Yamaha rig or wherever you go?
Wherever you
Right.
were. Yeah.
So that just blows my mind. And then, like you said, on the other side, setup wise, I think this is where parents go wrong. And so maybe I'm going to sit on my high horse here. There is no bike setup that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So why would you expect there to be one when your kid comes back and says, "Oh, this section over here is kicking my ass and the bike's kicking my ass"? Okay, well, what section is it good at? Because I
Yeah.
guarantee you, there's a section where the bike's really good. There's a section where it's not good. There's a section where it's okay. Why? Loretta's has brought in sand for the sand section. That's not natural terrain,
Right.
right? And it develops into a certain type of roughness and prep. It's very rough and whatever. And then you have the choppier clay sections that they don't prep quite as much that get drier, smaller, chattier type bump. And then you have the really deep clay type sections that have bigger, more challenging bumps and more ruts and maybe a little softer because there's shade and there's sunlight and there's all these variables. There isn't one tire that's correct for Loretta's in reality. There
Yep.
isn't one set of suspension setting that's correct for Loretta's. But guess what? The kids who win, they don't care.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to use the same analogy with Jet choosing the tire only for the start, and then realizes he's riding a bucking bronco for the rest of the track, and he's going to have to. He even said it on the podium. He
Hunter,
had to
yeah.
change his line. Excuse me, for Hunter, he had to change his lines up based on the tire choice that he had. But how much have we heard Lars from Factory Honda say, "We're always going to go for the start"? Especially there where it was at 180. It was
Right.
all about being the first one or two bikes in there. Otherwise, you had the bowling ball effect that manifested itself.
What I've tried to
So
teach young kids,
yeah,
I was better at racecraft than I was at speed, always. I was a great starter. Okay, so if I'm in front of you, you're going to have a hard time passing me.
yeah.
Now, having said that, why is that? Well, number one, you get to dictate what lines you take. If you
Mm-hmm.
take the best line around Loretta's, it makes it way harder for someone to pass you who has to go faster than you're going around the suboptimal line. So is line selection important? Yeah, you better be in the best line. Number two,
Mm-hmm.
don't make mistakes. But number three, if you're out front in front of the guy and he has to catch you, that takes work. Has to go around you in the shittier line, that takes work. And you sometimes have the more controlling line. Okay, it's inside and it's better for the next corner and the next corner, whatever it is. that's going to open the door to mistakes from your competition. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
they wanted to start with Hunter because he gets to dictate his lines. He gets to dictate his pace. He makes the guy earn the pass. Now, did Chase earn it the second moto? Yeah, he did.
Yep. He went
So,
around him. Yeah.
that is what it is. But they were willing to take that risk. And I think that that's something that you as a parent at any event you go to, including Loretta's, have to weigh your options on.
So this is what's going to make me lose some popularity, but we didn't start this show to become popular as much as it is to be helpful. I'm a very zeros and one guy, right? I'm on public record of saying that numerous times. On one hand, I'll have parents and riders that'll come over and say, can't pass anywhere on the track. It's impossible to pass. It's hard to pass. Well, then you're out front and somebody found a way to get around you. So to your point, if you know where the fast lines are at and you can be clean on your entry and you can execute and you can exit properly and you can do it every lap. Or look at this past weekend where, and I apologize, I don't remember who the rider was off top. Oh, it was Levi Kitchen when Hymas was all over his tail end. And James Stewart was talking about the idea that Levi got both in and out of the corner quicker than Hymas expected. And therefore, and we all know that Budds Creek was a very one-line track, as we saw, where you pretty much started is where you finished. Look at Deegan's second moto. Yeah, you could argue that the fire was out of his belly.
He looked like he was trying. 100%.
He was trying for the first, I would say at least the first 10 minutes for
and actually,
sure.
he's not immune to this. Side note, last year, he had a race like this, a couple races. If he started in the back, he ended up in the back. This year, he's been, the best he's ever been. But this is not, who said this? Who else said it? I think James said it. He said track position is so critical as to finishing position, just means starts. And very rarely are you that much better than 15 guys where you can battle, go where you want to go and pass them. Yes. Right. So yeah, and and it is true. Track position is super. And we'll get on that in a minute in the 85 senior class, which I observed some neat stuff.
Well, and that's where I think it's interesting. You can't, I've said this on our show before. What I get mad with is the moto dads who yell at their son or daughter, don't follow. And then the son or daughter doesn't follow. And I've used this example publicly, and I'll use it again for anybody who's new to the show. At Minneo's Supercross, that was the year it was always a short start, a bowl right-hand turn, immediately into a left-hand turn. And my rider gets a third place start, and he goes on the inside, literally follow leader, 1, 2, 3. My rider's number 3. The leader stalls the bike. The ruts are all the way up to the pegs, can't go anywhere. So if you look at a rider who's in 4th or 5th place and he or she goes out in the marbles, well, when the first place guy collects all 3, going out in the marbles was a brilliant. You weren't following. You went into the corner 5th. You came out in 1st. You look like a hero.
Yep.
Unfortunately, if you go out in the marbles, you could have come out of there. If 1, 2, and 3 filters through, you could have gone in that outside marbles in 4th and come out 9th.
Yep.
Well, now you're an idiot. Well, how can the athlete be both brilliant and stupid at the same time, right?
Nope.
Same line choice, 2 different results based on racing. And we tell young athletes and even older athletes, don't follow. Then when they don't follow, it doesn't always work out. This is what I think leads to a lot of confusions with the kids. If you're going to tell me that Loretta's is a tough track to pass on, and then you got passed, that tells me, to your point, you've become sloppy somewhere in the execution model between entrance, through, and out. 10 commandments, any corner in any part of the track, the timing sections, right? Whatever it may be. Well, obviously, for a track that wasn't easy to pass, you got passed. This is why every one of my clients is required to do a data dump. Every single race, you break down what went well and what didn't go well. Things that didn't go well that you can control, fix it. Things that didn't go well that you can't control, what you need to train.
Move on.
Pretty simple.
There's that, it's not a scripture, but it's like that prayer that, people say, and change the things you can change, move on from the things you can't change, and let's go and know the difference, right? You have to know the difference. You had said, like, Caden Ziri won a title. We talked about this. First moto, falls down while in like 7th or 8th or 6th, something like that. Dead last, all the way up to, I think, 6th or 7th, from completely, like, not just last, but last.
Yeah.
And you can't tell me you couldn't pass, because the dude passed 40 guys or 36 guys or whatever it was. But more importantly, here, I was thinking about your wheelhouse, which is the following. Okay, it's a hard track to pass on. I think Loretta's is a good racetrack. It has multiple lines, it has multiple options, it's ruddy, and the ruts are so challenging that if somebody makes a mistake and you chose a maybe different line that's okay, maybe you get the pass. So you got to pressure them to apply pressure, to apply mistakes, right? But number two is, you know what's the easiest way to pass people at Loretta's? Because
Start.
yeah, ask Tony Alessi about that. That's why they're so
Mm-hmm.
good at it. But let's just say you have to make passes. You're behind them. You got to move forward. You're 10th, you need to get up to front, or you're 20th, you're 30th, whatever. Is how many people maintained their lap times at Loretta to the very end within a second or two?
Not many.
Okay, so if you can do that, you will get passes.
Yep.
So be fit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that hard. You may not, if you're 20th and you're really, really fit, for the most part, in almost every single class I watched, and you can go look this up online because it's all publicly available on their lap sheet. If you just held your lap times with one or two of your peak, you will be moving forward. And the people that did that in those lap sheets are moving forward. And the people that didn't do that are moving backwards. So not that complicated. Be really, really fit. And you had said, what's another observation you might have had? I mean, what else you got on that one that
Well,
hasn't changed in 17 years?
I'd like to elaborate on what you just said because I think this will resonate with every parent that's out there. What you described, there's two ways that you can win a race: negative split it, be faster at the end than you started, or not slow down as much as everybody else. So what I always look for, Mitch Payton looks for it, most of the factory team owners look for the same thing: consistency in lap time and the lack of falling off at the end. What blows my mind is that's how you're supposed to train, and you're supposed to race the way you train. And yet people went out there and raced the exact opposite of the way, from a physiological standpoint, that you should race. What do you know about Blake Baggett? What was he known for?
Coming on strong at the end.
What's
My
Tomac
anecdotal
known
evidence, for? When I rode and I got finally to 35-minute fit, which is, it's not just fitness, right? It's how you ride and how you approach it. But a lot of times, because I held myself accountable, I want to take every lap time. Well, if I don't do that, I don't know how good my practice session was. I don't know if I really was, I gave it all I had. Yep. I did that since I was doing 5-lap races, right? Now we're pushing to 15s and 17s. I always gave it all I had, but that doesn't mean that that was your best average time or your lap times are good. So you have to be accountable. Well, what I learned was late in some motos there, once I really got this stuff figured out, a lot of times I would turn my fastest lap of the moto. Why? Well, number one, I'm trying to adapt to the track. So if you're not changing what you're doing and trying to improve every single lap, you're just hanging on for dear life and just doing the same thing. That's not the right way to approach the track. That's a mentality thing. I'm trying to be efficient out there because it's a 35-minute moto. You can't just go full blast, full sprint. But a lot of times you would find this weird combination of, wow, I just found a really good way around this racetrack. That is the way around. And number two, because I'm trying to be efficient, sometimes you just find this flow and your entry to a corner was a little bit better and then your exit got better and then you didn't have to brake so hard and all of these factors that come in, your suspension worked better because you weren't on the brake so hard and on the gas so hard. And all of a sudden it culminates into a really good lap time. And so for me, oftentimes that would happen late into motos. And that was just finally piecing this whole racetrack together. Right. And just saying, okay, yeah, if I really struggled with the line a few times, man, I struggled. Okay. I'm not going to go struggle on that line next lap. Either figure it out and change something differently or change your darn line. Right. And in a race, that's hard to do because you're afraid to give up the line, But to me, if you're not practicing those things, then you're never going to attempt it in your race. I think we say this before. I don't know if we've said this in this show, but I always say you revert to your worst version of yourself on race day. So whatever technique you've been trying to implement, get on the balls of your feet or keep your elbow up or whatever it is that you've been working on. But if you had the bad habit, guess where it shows?
Always on race day.
Every time. If you're afraid to get out of your line choice and you've been working on that, you fall back to those habits. So you really got to practice this at just to the point where it becomes who you are, not how you think you want to be. And that's tough, right? So,
well, it's tough, but it's not tough. I'll bring up something that is going to rip a scab off for a lot of people. And that is this ideology that the only way to go fast is to do sprint work constantly, 52 weeks out of the year. How'd that work out for you, Pat? How did that strategy work out for you at Loretta's?
You can't build a house just out of 2x4s.
But what blows my mind is you're bringing up what's one of the biggest, an additional thing that I've seen for 19 years. Talk to the facilities and their whole facility mindset, and a lot of the riding coaches away from facilities. Got to work on your sprint speed. Well, last time I checked, you didn't lose the race because you couldn't sprint. You lost the race because you couldn't go 20 minutes. That's called endurance.
Well, and
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 yet,
and you probably, I think you had a great one of your athletes, Rieger, that you've talked about on some of your social medias, and he's been a client of ours the last year, 2 years. He's pretty good. He's like fitness wise.
mhm.
100% has more fitness than the guys around him for the most part. Looked like his times were consistent to the end. Looks like he's doing the program pretty well. So, is there something that he should work on? Yeah. He needs to find more speed to go win,
Yep.
right? But having said that, that's if he comes out of the race weekend, that's what he knows he needs to work on, right? But if you
Mhm.
know that, hey, I'm just not fit enough, period, why would you do sprint work all the time? Okay, yeah, you
Well,
can go fast. Well, that's worthless because you're not fit, period. You know what I
well,
mean?
here's what you just said has so much meat on the bone, and I want to make sure that nobody misses it. Can anybody listening to this who doesn't know Ryder as a person, can you tell me where he was a year ago? Right. So the interesting part is a year ago, he was at Loretta's in the C class. So his speed is right where we anticipate if you're
Right. He's not
looking at.
off.
No,
Right.
no, no, no.
Yeah.
To your point is this is what makes our sport so volatile. We'll look at somebody and we make an assumption. We know nothing about their background. You mentioned Patrick Murphy. I don't know that half the people listening would even know Patrick's background. Your conversation was if you go look at his results, he has 3 DNSs and 3 DNFs. That just poses a question, not who's building the motor. The question is, how did it happen? That was
How
what
did
you
it happen?
posed.
How do you fix it for next time?
Right. When we look at Ryder's hands were completely blistered. Like there wasn't a millimeter of his palm that didn't have a blister on it. Okay. Is that grip selection? No. It's a track that's rougher than anything that an amateur can see during the year. We've talked about this as well. There's not a single track that's as rough as that track gets because the sheer volume of the bikes that hit it, the way it starts out nice and wet, it becomes sun baked, it becomes pretty hard, et cetera, et cetera. So now you add another new dynamic to it. What is somebody's background? What is somebody's background with injuries? What's somebody's background with training? What does somebody's last 18 months look like? So that's what I think is so cool about the physiological side of it. When we look at incremental improvements, we always say that when we go racing, we can produce the desirable outcome because we've trained for that desirable outcome. And the listeners may look at that and go, yeah, that's a kind of a captain obvious statement, but there's more meat on the bone that we have to take into consideration. I have to use a negative example to get the positive understood. Did you not win the race? With our clients, we look at it as 4 pillars of success. You have preparation, fed, rested, hydrated, and focused. You have to be fit, endurance, power, sprint speed. You have to have a strategy. Most people don't realize that there's an inverse relationship between intensity and duration. And yet there's facilities telling these kids, you've got to sprint and then you've got to hold that for 20 minutes. Well, go tell Usain Bolt that and tell him to go win the marathon. It's
Yeah.
physiologically not
Fastest
possible.
dude in the marathon, not going to win it.
Isn't going to win it. And then you go and you look at the fourth component, and that's recovery. We have, if you add Monday, we have essentially 6 days that you have to not only be fast, you have to be able to recover. You have to be fast. You have to be able to recover. You have to be consistent. You have to be able to recover. You were there. You saw it was last man standing by Saturday.
Right. And
It,
you mentioned, so we'll talk on the other pillars. So things that we noticed, and we kind of jointly noticed this was, so people were surprised that it was hot.
mm-hmm,
Number one. The other
mm-hmm,
thing that I noticed is that people were like, yeah, I couldn't finish the 20-minute moto. Well, how many did you have today? Were they close together? And there were some classes that were within a few motos. Okay. That happens. It's not often, but it does happen.
mm-hmm.
Oh no, I just had one class today, and you could not go the 20 minutes.
Yep.
And
It
if you're a
makes
C
my
class guy,
makes my blood boil.
right? And if you're a C class guy, the 15,
Mm-hmm,
right? Well, wait a second. So yeah, it's hotter than you're used to. Okay, that has a massive physiological role. Don't get me
mm-hmm,
wrong. I know that, especially if you're not used to the heat. Okay, so what are you
mm-hmm.
going to do to fix that? Are you going to go train in some areas that are hotter? And to your point, how are you going to plan to do that? Are you going to do it 2-3 weeks before Loretta's and grind yourself into the ground? Maybe you should get with somebody who knows what they're talking about, like yourself, and have a better plan than that. Right? Okay, hey,
Well,
we need to acclimate to heat, but we're not going to do it to where it's detrimental to our program. Number
let's
two would be like, I mean, how can you not go 20? So on your point, you said the 4 pillars. Well, if you don't nail even one of those pillars, you're going to struggle. Was your nutrition
that's
right?
my point. If
Right.
one of those has gone awry, your whole program disassembles. Go
Right.
ahead. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly
Just
right.
so you have to, if you can check off all those boxes and you still can't go 20, and you did everything right. Okay, maybe you're just not fit enough. Understood. But at the same time, and I look at it like this, whatever your fitness level is and whatever your riding speed is, you have to choose the pace that will let you maximize your fitness and maximize your pace to get your best overall result. Okay, I
But
know that it's 20 minutes long. I'm just this current level fitness. So I got to ride 2 seconds a lap off of my peak pace, and then I can finish the moto. That's the
add
best.
add one layer to what you just said. And I want every parent to think about this. How many hours, and you guys can go back and look at it, right? We all have hour meters on our bikes. On average, how many hours, and this is what I love about the Garmin, because I can go in and actually look at this. Every time you start an activity, I can go to your date and I can see on Tuesday the 10th, I can see that you did 6 motos, you did 320s and 310s, right? Very, very easy. Get a calculator out, I add it up. Now, Derek, if I get confusing, let me know. If you're putting, I'm going to use a low number. I've heard numbers that were as high as 5 hours a day on the dirt bike, asinine beyond belief, but okay. Let's go conservative. Let's say you're putting 3 hours a day on the bike and you're doing that 4 days a week, 12 hours in one week, and your entire race week is 2 hours. That's over 6 days. And you're putting on average 12 hours a week on the bike. You cannot tell me it's a fitness issue. That's called heat exhaustion. That's called overtraining. It's underhydrated and malnourished.
All of
It's
the above, right? Yeah.
pretty simple
And if you're,
because
it really like, and I get it, it's race day. Your intensity level mentally and physiologically probably was ratcheted up a notch,
mhm.
right? Like your kid, but that's called practicing properly. Okay.
Well, practice and then taper, right? We
Right.
rebuild the bike. We have to get our new race bike for Loretta's. We
Right.
run down to Derek and we invest in this beautiful, I think it looks like a piece of art. You got this beautiful motor, right? You've got this dialed in suspension. You've got the frame broken in. You've got enough hours on it so it does exactly what you want. Wasn't it funny? We freshened up the tires.
But
We freshened up the suspension. We freshened up the motor. We put a new ECU on it. We're running top of the line race gas. We got bold new graphics. We got new seat covers by Guts. We got everything. And then you put a throttle jockey on there that's physically and emotionally and blood
right.
chemistry depleted.
Not right.
And then we
So,
wonder why. And yet 18
and
years
then
and I've seen
let's,
the same
what's the
thing.
best? So here's, we've already talked to one client, not client, well, one of my clients, but potentially, hopefully I can bring him on board for you about this though. And here's mistake number 3. That's not what we witnessed at Loretta's, but this would be if you're evaluating how your Loretta's went and then you're trying to get better and ready. I see this every single year from the same families, from the same people, from people I know, from people that I watch. I mean, it's everybody does it. So what happens when
Okay.
Loretta's doesn't go how well they want? Or sometimes for families, it went better than they hoped, or they won a title, but what do? They've been on this grind. They go put out a maximal effort during the week, and then they get home and they're like, it either didn't go as good as I wanted, or it did go as good as I wanted, and I'm going to grind harder, and I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
keep this grind rolling after Loretta's.
Mm-hmm.
So
And for anybody who follows AC, when he was back on 85s, it was very public knowledge, and this was before we had social media. The Monday after Loretta's, the entire family, including Zach Freeberg and Zach Commons, they were on a 10-day cruise. No phone, no internet, no nothing. One of the most successful amateurs in the history of motocross
the most successful amateur in the history of motocross.
did the exact opposite of what everybody else is doing. And yet people will hear it and go, yeah, but we're different. We're
So
different.
there's you understand the mentality of it, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is we do have a United States mentality of work harder, grind harder, be harder, go better, and there's a business culture problem behind that a little bit too, which is, hey, don't need to prioritize your sleep and your health and your this or that and just go grind. That's how you've been taught to get better. Just grind harder, just keep going, keep the grind. But at the end of the day, like you said, those are the most successful amateur ever to take the break. And then I have an example in our area. His last name was Gabe. His first name was Gabriel. The last name was Harala. He was an
Okay.
85cc, not champ, but a 65cc champ, 11111 type kid.
Okay.
Top, 10 Loretta's 80 kid. And I could go into detail. I think they were with the wrong shop personally. Hopefully that shop doesn't take offense to that. I think that they held themselves back on that pretty tremendously on equipment. They finally got pretty decent equipment on super minis, showed pretty well, got hurt, and then literally career was over. But this was one of the most talented kids I have gotten to see, and I've gotten to work with a bunch now. He should have been one of those Supercross pros we have, but they had the same thing. They were grinders, but the one thing that they were smart about was after Loretta's, a month off. We don't touch, we don't look at, we don't ride, we don't talk dirt bikes, we don't go, we're off, we don't work out because they grinded all year long. Now they probably
Hmm.
could have benefited from less grinding, and I knew their program pretty well and got to ride with a kid when he was young at certain tracks. He'd be riding in the heat of Texas, probably, he'd do 6 to 8 20s in a day. At one of the most rough, challenging tracks in Texas, private track, where Andrew Short
Hmm.
and Eli Tomac and Ken Roxon and all these guys that trained a bunch at,
Yeah.
super brutal, right? Put in the work, but um, they also understood the priority, like you said, of rest. So if you're after Loretta's now and you just didn't go as well as you wanted and you're not resting and you feel like you did grind pretty hard, maybe you need to get in touch with somebody like Coach here and say, hey, what am I doing wrong? And guess what? On that topic, got the Garmin. We
Hmm.
talked one of the early shows about me starting to maybe do some of the Coach Robb program. I'm so out of shape that I'm not even ready for the Coach Robb entry level program yet. So I've been walking. That's all I've been doing. And on that point, though, I had a text you the other day. I said, hey, what's your heart rate, resting deal? And I had noticed I had a couple just whatever days and it's hot here. And then I walked and blah, blah, blah. And like my just resting heart rate that night never came kind of in my normal
Comes
range.
down. Yeah.
Right. You've said time and time again, like, hey, these are signs that even though that's an easy workout for me, and even though that's easy work for me, and I don't feel like I'm doing a heck of a lot, it's enough physiologically that obviously my body's saying, hey, dude, you're not healed, you're not recovered. And I notice it, my sleep score and all these things that the Garmin's track. It's been mind blowing to just kind of follow the app and
Hmm.
say, I don't know anything about it. You know a
Hmm.
million things about it, but I'm like, I didn't get good quality rest last night according to my app, and my
Hmm.
heart rate was up, and yesterday was a little long and I had to go this and do that, and all of a sudden you start putting those things together and it's like, oh. And normally I would just go grind it out. Hey, I've got to walk again today and I got to go do this and I got to go do that. So to your point, how many parents know that? How many parents do any of this kind of stuff? And you'd have to have an expert like yourself to to take the data for a kid, because I'm just learning myself now. It's taking me a while. So how many parents do you think at Loretta's know anything about something you've talked about? Do you weigh yourself twice a day?
Probably less than 1%. And that's why I try to get on every podcast I can, because I want the parents to realize if you can always draw a parallel between the way you treat your motorcycle and the way that your athlete is being treated or treats themselves, you're going to realize there's a complete disjoint. You would never run diesel fuel on your race bike, but we think running through McDonald's is okay because Johnny's hungry and it's quick and it's convenient. Now, I'm not a hellfire brimstone. I'm not tree bark and eat snails. I'm not that extreme. You guys know that. But at some level, you've got to recognize who is riding the motorcycle. If you, if I can put this into perspective on a track, right? You've got a rider, he or she can clear that double third gear all day long. All of a sudden starts clipping a quarter of the rear wheel, then just fucking completely frame cases it one day. And your rider's like, Dad, Mom, I'm third gear, I'm wide open, and I don't have the speed to go the distance. What's the first thing you would do? You'd rebuild the motor, because obviously the motor's not going fast enough. Third gear wide open used to be you could butter the backside like Jeremy McGrath. Now you're frame casing it because you don't have enough speed to go the distance. Well, if it's not a double jump, let's say it's a box hop. If it's not a box hop, let's say it's a 10-mile time trial. If it's not a 10-mile time trial, maybe it's a 20-minute moto. This is where we use what, with all of our clients, we use what's called critical speed numbers. How fast can you go? And then how long can you maintain it? So I don't want it to be convoluted. We go to a track, you lay down a 5-lapper, throw out the fastest, throw out the slowest, average the other three. That's your critical speed number for today's track, given its condition. Now focus on being consistent at that. Wear the heart rate monitor, run a 5-lapper. I don't want to be confusing. We do a 5-lapper as soon as we get to the track. We throw out the fastest and slowest, you average the other three. That's your critical speed number. Now it averages out to 2 minutes a lap. Our goal is to do 5 laps with no more than a 1 second deviation. So you go out and you do that, you download the heart rate data, you look at your average and your max. Now we can use that not as a whipping tool, as an accountability variable that says, hey, look, I know that my rider, or me, the rider, I know that I can run 2 minute lap times at X to Y heart rate. Let's say it's between 170 and 175. Well, now this is where you come in. And I'm not saying this because you're a partner in this show, but if a rider goes out there and we don't see their heart rate getting above 165, I know that they're not comfortable with the bike setup because they're physically not pushing their human body to an intensity that we have validated that they can push. Then not only can they push it, they can maintain it for 12, 18 to 25
Right.
minutes.
That or an effort level, right? They're just not into it. Either
There's the
or.
key
Yep.
word, is the effort level. Is it perceived exertion? Huge margin of error.
Right.
Dehydration, not enough calories, sleep deprived, heat,
And
humidity, et
I will
cetera, et
say
cetera.
this from my experience, but most moto riders, I think a Dungey type would be opposite of this, but most motocross riders, perception, what do you call it?
The perceived exertion.
Perceived exertion level is usually lower than your real exertion level if you've
Exactly.
been a short duration sprint type rider your whole life,
Well,
right?
this is what we call the familiarity principle. Like I was never as fast as you. So on your bad day would be faster than I've ever ridden in my life. So my perception is this is ripping fast. Remember I said earlier, you have to know what the athlete's background is.
Right.
This is a prime example. I would not train James Stewart the same way I would train Logan Best. I wouldn't train Logan Best the way I train Reichert. I wouldn't train Reichert the way that I would Chase Dashel. You
Right.
have age, you have experience, you have durability, you have injury background. Unfortunately, I've picked up a bundle of athletes that have been absolutely roasted by quote unquote trainers and facilities. And I'm not here to throw anybody under the bus. I'm here to fix the
Right.
problem and get the best out of the athlete. So that's where I've had a little bit of an uphill battle is riding coaches see me as a threat instead of a compliment to what they do. If I have the working with Andrew Short as a riding coach, if Andrew Short wants you to stand up, sit down, sing kumbaya, my responsibility is that I'm going to be able to get you into a position that when you work with Andrew Short or any really competent riding coach, the Ben Riddles, the Ryan Sipes of the world, I want to make sure that when you do that, that you're able to do whatever. And this is why we start our own CRS coaching network. So that if you go and you work with a Ben Moberg or a Jamie Hunkler, I want to make sure that 100% you understand the purpose of the workout. It's not always about going balls to the wall. There's a time and a place to do 1 and 2 and 3 lap
I got a
sprinter.
message from anyway, a trainer, and he was like, because you had previously said something like, you can't just do sprint work constantly. And that was our clip, and it was a short clip, and it didn't say that. It was like a sprint, don't be doing sprint work type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, what you just said here, and I think clients need to understand this is, and you've said this to me in a text message, it's important. So is, and other sports say this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go, a lot of people do not go hard enough on their hard training days. And then they don't go anywhere near light enough on their light training days. But there's truly a value to hitting both those targets. Because if you're somewhere in the middle, you're never going to get to where you want to go. And the problem is the middle is where a lot of motocross riders live, right? They don't live on peak effort on a high intensity hit type day, whatever you would call those days. And then on their super easy days, because they're not used to not going hard ish, they're not used to being below a threshold, and they don't understand the value of the two. And I think that's where you do a good job, but it's to trying to tell a guy.
Well, literally, I just did a consultation call today, and the gentleman's exact words were, I was going and doing HIT. For those of you who don't know what HIT acronym is, it stands for high intensity interval training. Think about CrossFit just in generic terms. So this gentleman's exact terminology, he said, I was doing HIT training and then went to the track and couldn't go more than 2 laps fast. And I said, because that's what you trained yourself to do.
Yeah, you trained yourself to be fit.
There's this ideology. And what I'd like the listeners to do is please replace the word HIT and replace it with lactate tolerance or anaerobic threshold. People are like, oh my gosh, that's hard words. Hold on. You didn't come out of your mom's womb understanding compression and rebound and setting sag. So be open-minded to something a little bit new. And I say that very respectfully because think about the word anaerobic. You're working in an environment without the presence of oxygen. There's only one way you can go once the human body goes anaerobic. You're going to have to slow down until there's enough oxygen in the blood to survive. I don't want that to sound like I'm over dramatizing.
Essentially, when you're anaerobic, it's like holding your breath. Your body's working on that principle.
If I go down to your carburetor and you're flying down the track and I could miraculously hang on to the bike without you knowing I'm there, and I grab your air fuel tube and I just start pinching it off, you're still holding it wide open. But as I pinch it off until there's none going in, and eventually it stops. Well, your body's the same way.
Yep.
The difference is that we have a self-correcting mechanism that keeps us from killing ourselves. That's what's pretty powerful, by the way.
Hey, I wish motors had that, by the way.
Well, that's why I think it's so cool. Like with the way that you guys can program it, you can, like you've told me, there's a couple pro riders that you actually have the rev limiter set So once it bounces off of it, actually lowers the RPMs automatically to keep you from grenading the bike, bending the valves, and all that goes with it. As I've teased you both on this show and public or privately, if we were as absolute, if you're a listener to this and you've got somebody who has they're a type 1 or a type 2 diabetic, and you realize how our body responds to the food we put in, our pancreas releases insulin as a byproduct of what we eat. Well, unfortunately, a diabetic their body doesn't produce insulin. So literally you could die as a diabetic, right? If you put it in such absolute terms, or if we ran out of calories in a given day, like literally we just stop like a robot, or like your car
Then you
just
would
drifts off,
prioritize it more properly.
you would never let yourself run out of gas.
Right. And that's a great
I want
analogy.
the
It's like,
listeners
hey,
to think about it. When was the
if
last time you let your truck run out of gas? Not your motorcycle,
yeah,
because we always weigh the cost benefit, right? If I run out of gas on the track, oh, it sucks, but I got to push it back maybe half mile. If you're 100 miles from home and you run out of gas and you're out in the Arizona desert and you realize you're officially stranded, you wouldn't allow that to happen.
And it's very rare that, I mean, it happens, but that people run out of gas on the dirt bike nowadays because it can get you hurt. Right. So same with your body. And that's a great analogy. I like that. If you knew that, hey, the second you run out of calories, which would be analogous to gasoline in your bike, your body
just
just stopped.
You
the
just
problem is they
physically
don't
stopped.
realize that their body has sort of kind of stopped. Your body is so adaptable that it keeps going, but it's
That's what
not so
makes us
adaptable
dangerous.
that it goes at its best performance level.
That's what makes us dangerous is
Right.
as long as a parent can see that their rider is still riding, it doesn't mean that their blood sugar levels are not at a dangerously low level. Now, let's speak a little bit more positively, something that'll resonate with the parents. When your athlete has low blood sugar, their depth perception, when to transition from on the gas to the brake and from the brake back to the gas, when you have low blood sugar, that depth perception is negatively impacted. So you see your rider all of a sudden starts throwing anchor. What's the first thing everybody assumes? Oh, they need to be in shape.
Right.
So then they go to the gym and they smash the kid into the ground with all this high intensity interval training, which is not the limiting factor. As a human being, the number one limiting factor will always be the ability to deliver oxygen.
Aerobic.
We're mammals, right? So the inability to deliver oxygen is the number one issue, not lactate tolerance. Now, does that mean that there's not listeners out there who the energy system, lactate tolerance, anaerobic threshold? For those of you who don't want to get into physiology, think about your rev limiter on your truck. If you're driving it at red line every single day, what's your gas mileage? Very, very low. What's the wear and tear on the truck? Very, very high. It's the same thing on the human body. It's called oxidative stress. It's a byproduct of converting stored sugar into energy. People go, oh my gosh, that's too complicated. Hold on. Why does the marketing agencies out there say that fruits and vegetables are high in antioxidants, and yet nobody knows what an oxidant is? Oxidative stress is what happens when you bring the heart rate up, just like your pipe, right? If you blip the throttle and you've got your hand back there and you're warming your hands up, what happens when you blip the throttle? Where's your hand go? It gets blown back, right?
We put more oxygen in and we put more oxygen out. Or well, it's not oxygen, but I should, we put more air in and we got more
combustion out the back.
We got more out the back, more air out the back, a different kind of air.
So for the listeners, when you look in the mirror and you have dark circles under your eyes, you have brittle hair, dry skin, no sex drive, craving simple sugars, can't sleep, night sweats, that's adrenal fatigue from having the heart rate too high, too long, too often, and not eating enough food, not eating enough high quality fats. Now you start a domino cascading effect called adrenal fatigue.
Which is what percentage of the pro community is going through or gone through that?
90% of it.
Right.
And I'll give you three specific people. You have Marchbanks, who has Addison's disease.
He's come out and said he had that. Yep.
All these guys have come out.
Yeah. Publicly available knowledge.
Seth Hammaker said he has adrenal fatigue. And you've got Jet Reynolds, who has Epstein-Barr.
Right.
Those are fatigue-related diseases associated with high intensity training, insufficient calories, dehydration, and sleep deprivation. And yet we go to Loretta's and we see parents, to your point, that's like, we had a bad week at Loretta's. No way, Jose, are we pulling the brakes.
And I think our sport shifted a little bit with some guys. And actually, it was a comment I had for you, by the way. Personal question, but it'll work for the show.
Okay.
Do you believe there's an optimal, not body fat percentage, but we'll call it that, right? Not specifically, but do you feel like there's a certain, for a motocross athlete, can you be too pudgy? Can you not? Because the reality is, I think from what I've been researching and reading, you can be pretty darn pudgy. Your cardiovascular system can be incredibly strong. Your physical system can be incredibly strong. It's not just because somebody's overweight is a caloric surplus that they like to take on, but it's not
Mhm.
an indication of the fact that they are in shape or not. So do you think that there is a specific look or leanness that's required for motocross? And if so, what do you think it is?
I like what you just said. Look, no, percentages, yes. Because there's people that would be 8 or 9% body fat, but they don't look it because they're just thick individuals. If you guys want to Google Christian Blumenfeld from Norway, he's one of our top triathletes. He looks like a fullback. And
But he's
if
percentage wise
percentage wise, he's at 3.5 to probably 6%,
very
throughout the
lean.
year. Very,
Okay.
very lean. He's the defending Olympic champion. He just got, I think, 10th or 11th at this one, but he's won Iron. He's got third at Ironman. He's the world champion at the half Ironman. I mean, he's
Right, right. So he
unbelievable.
just doesn't look like
He
what we would
doesn't
call ripped,
look
right?
like it. But if you go look at Alex Yee, who did win the Olympics this year, he's got bones like a bird, very, very thin,
Right.
very light, very nimble. If you looked at Yee and you looked at Blumenfeld, you wouldn't put them in the same percentage of body fat, but their physiques look completely different. I
Sorry.
like the fact that you bring this up because in the world of moto, one of the things that we have to think about is you have skin, you have body fat, you have fascia, which is connective tissue. Then you get down to the muscles, then you get into bones, tendons, and ligaments, right? From the surface
Mhm.
all the way down. So the thicker that body fat, the harder it is for you to dissipate heat. So it's just like you rubbing mud all over the radiators.
So there
Doesn't
is
matter
a
if,
value. So there is a value because I was going to say, do you think there's any resiliency to someone being a little bit on the less lean side?
well, this is where we get into a very, very sensitive subject. If I'm dealing with somebody that needs to be Olympic distance triathlete, short, fast, hour and 40 minutes of speed, we work on what we call literally strength to weight ratios as a percentage of body fat. It's a mathematical calculation. So there we even have it calculated literally per pound of body fat, the ramifications on your pace per mile. I mean,
Which in Tour de France or is, and I'm
it's
assuming the
all
same
calculated.
in your world,
Triathlon, running, everything.
100% relevant, right? If Lance
Yes,
can keep his power number up that he did, and I don't care if he doped, not doped, whatever
it
they all
doesn't
do,
matter. It doesn't matter.
the more weight he lost, if his power maintained the same, the faster athlete he was up the
to
mountains.
to a point,
Right.
because when you get into blood chemistry, your ability to deliver oxygen, we measure it in
Uh-huh.
hematocrit levels. It's, as Dr. Ferrari would always say, it always boils down to the red blood cell count, RBC count, because that's where you carry your oxygen in your blood. So he always says it's about the red blood. It's
Right.
always about the red blood cell count.
So if they got too small or something, that might drop
Well,
or
but that's where I wanted to elaborate, because
okay.
if you're going to go on percentages, there is a point, and this is where we get back to it's what we call biochemistry and the individuality of the person. And we do this with every one of our clients. We test every single 6 weeks, but we always start with body measurements. So as the body composition changes, we bounce it against field testing, because there is a point in diminishing return where you can get so lean that you lose both speed and endurance. And of course, the other end of the spectrum is you carry too much body fat, you negatively impact speed
Well, I
and
was to say,
endurance.
I think we've seen in our sport
That
of
fine
transition.
line.
Right. I was
Yeah.
to say that you have like a Tomac and a Webb who are clearly now pudgier than they ever were.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure some of that's just their manness, right? Like they were kids when they were 20 and 18, and now they're men. So there's a little bit difference there in their look. And I honestly, I don't want to go out and say that I think Tomac looks pudgy. I think he
No,
doesn't,
no,
right?
he
But I
looks
mean, I think
healthy.
they look a little bit not as lean as they did
They
when
don't
they
look
were.
emaciated.
Yeah. On the flip side, you have Kenny going the other way. I think Kenny's
Mhm.
gone the incredibly lean. Now I think I'm not going to even go into the other comment I was going to say. Genetically, that's his build. He just
Mhm.
has a very, I joke with my buddies. Kenny was brewed in a German petri dish to come over and dominate American motocross, and just had that one little crash that ruined his arm. And
Oh,
otherwise, we would be talking about how a German was probably one of the best of all time.
yeah.
Right. So he just was brewed to look like this freak athlete that he is, and all of these things. And that thing hurt him back. But yeah,
But
to,
that's what
to
I love about physiology, and without even being intentional, as that we said earlier, you don't want to judge a book by the cover and then say someone should, there's the key word, should look a certain way. I was working with a particular athlete, and he had literally just come past puberty, like literally just started seeing the testosterone drop in, and he literally still had his baby fat. And he was approached by a team manager who said, if you look like that, I would fire you. And it freaked the parents out like you wouldn't believe. And the parents are like, we got to get the body weight off. I said, no, we don't. It will come off as the body goes through its nap. And it goes back to, like we talked about, what makes our sport so dangerous is we have a lot of uneducated so-called ex-pros that are now trainers in the bro network. And hey, it's very, very sizzling and sexy to say, don't eat gluten, don't eat dairy, don't eat red meat. Now, I don't know what else is really left at the grocery store once you take those three things out. But if I want to make you so freaking miserable, and I guess in some demented way, it makes you feel like I'm smart because I told you don't eat gluten, don't eat dairy, don't eat red meat. And then I throw a couple little textbook things out there, right? Well, I guess that makes me, according to what I've seen historically, which I find completely asinine, the more I can make it more difficult and more challenging and complicated, somehow that makes the trainer sound sophisticated. But if you ask the trainer, for a couple of the trainers that have made those declarations, it's very, very, very easy, very shallow, but very easy to go, well, we don't do dairy because of bovine hormones, and we don't do red meat because of the acidity, and we don't use gluten because of inflammation. I understand all of those in a textbook environment. But until you can validate that you as an athlete perform better, not eating gluten, not consuming dairy, and not eating red meat, especially now because our government has screwed up our food so bad, I don't think there's a single listener out there that isn't aware of bovine hormones. So because the manufacturers are realizing that end user is getting more educated, guess what? There's less and less use of bovine hormones.
Right. And you can buy
It's not an
better
issue.
quality food if you
It's
don't
not an
if you choose
epidemic.
to. Yeah.
It's a problem, but it's not an epidemic because it is
Hey,
available.
I think my brother, he's bigger than me and I'm bigger than my dad and like that kind of deal. Hey, I think he got the benefit of the of some of these
The bovine
hormones or whatever.
hormones.
He's
Yeah.
6'1" and like looks like he's pretty ripped up. I'm like, I wish I'd gotten to eat what he was eating when he was a little bit
Yeah.
younger.
But do you
As a joke, but
realize? No, I get it 100%. But there's also some validity to the idea. If you've eaten or if you eat gluten and you get irritable bowel syndrome, you truly have celiac disease. No, you shouldn't eat gluten.
yeah,
But
but there's
until
a
you
small percentage
validate that,
statistically of that. I've actually been
well,
looking into that. Yeah, it's a very
but
small
the whole
percentage.
idea is okay. But if I say to you, don't eat this,
Right.
don't eat that. So now what I do is I take the food group at the grocery store and I remove it, as you know, go in the grocery store, shop the perimeter, produce, deli, dairy, all of these bakeries, right? Get the fresh bread and all. As soon as I say to you, don't go to the bakery department, don't go to the deli department,
Right.
don't go to the meat department, don't, well, for goodness sakes, where are you going to shop in the store? Because everything in the middle of the store is processed and is loaded with preservatives. That's why it's
Yeah.
in a box or a can. Well, that's not good for you. If you can't pronounce it, you can't digest it.
Yeah.
Well, my goodness. So now I tell you, out of the 3,000 items in the grocery store, here's the 11 you're allowed to eat. Well, how long is it going to take for you to become absolutely miserable? Because you're eating 11 items. You have to, now again, for some of the parents here, even if you have a young athlete, let's say a 65 or an 85 rider, please listen. It is not atypical for your athlete to be burning 3,000 to 5,000 calories at the age of 10, 11, and 12 years old.
I
I've
actually want
seen
to
it.
comment on that. Yeah. So I was to say, I was always little as a kid, skinny, little, couldn't put on weight. And then now that I'm doing all the tracking and whatever,
Sure.
and granted, I'm an adult. I don't know what my load was as a kid, but I was so active 24/7, bicycles and running and all this stuff. It's obvious why I didn't put on weight. My parents didn't know that, yeah, he can eat a lot more.
He should
Oh,
eat
he's
a
just
lot more.
naturally that skinny. No, had I ate a lot more, I would have been a heavier kid. Like that's a fact. You know what
You
I
would have
mean?
been
So
healthier.
yeah, I just didn't know, right? Like we just flat out didn't know. And so don't, when you look at a calorie recommendation, to your point, it's not universal. We have a standardized guideline for adults, right? But that's just an averages on maybe
That's
some
what these
cases on,
are. That's why
yeah.
these Garmin's are a game changer.
How accurate do you think that it is in general? I know I was actually Googling that the other day. I didn't really get a definitive answer, but how close do you think they are?
It's very accurate, probably within 2 to 3%. So
Okay.
think about this. If an athlete, I just did the math on the calculator here. If your athlete burns 3,000 calories, if you divide that by 75, think about an extra large egg as just a general, that would be 40 eggs in one day your athlete would have to eat. So tomorrow morning, when they wake up, lay 4 dozen eggs on the counter.
Right.
And say between the now and when you go to bed, you have to eat 4 dozen eggs just to break even.
Right.
I'm not arguing the source of the calories.
Right,
I'm
yeah,
just
I know you're just saying
calorie
calories.
burn.
Yeah.
Source of calories. Think of the volume of food. 40 extra large eggs. Now,
Right.
I have had 85 riders that are not extremely big. They're not super small, but they're not super big either. In a 20-minute moto, 650 calories. So you're at a facility and you're putting 4 hours on your dirt bike. You got to remember, and I'm not trying to insult anyone's intelligence. As you bring the heart rate up, calorie burn rate's
Load
going
goes
up.
up. Right.
So now that athlete's burning 45. Let's say that we double that. Let's say that, and I have seen these numbers, 6,000 calories